some murmured in surprise, some laughed nervously, and others whispered admiration. Martha could feel the tension in the air shift, a small wave of relief passing through her body. For the first time that morning, she dared to hope that the nightmare might end. Red Lawson stood firm, his presence alone enough to command attention. He did not shout or threaten, but his quiet strength spoke louder than any words. Martha looked at Samuel and whispered softly, Maybe we're not alone after all." The auctioneer's face tightened, a mixture of frustration and fear. He realized that this man was not just another townsman. He was someone who could not be intimidated easily. Red's gaze did not waver as he repeated, "She is not for sale. Leave her be." The townspeople began to murmur in agreement, their curiosity shifting toward admiration for the cowboy's courage. Martha felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. The nightmare of the auction might not end the way she had feared. The crowd in the square fell into an uneasy silence as Red Lawson, the tall cowboy, stood firmly in front of Martha and Samuel. The wind blew dust along the dirt streets, but Red's presence seemed to push it back, creating a small island of calm around the mother and her child. Martha held Samuel close, feeling his tiny body against her chest. His soft whimpers were almost drowned by the murmurs of the townspeople, yet the baby seemed to sense the protective energy surrounding him. Martha's heart swelled with a mix of hope and fear. She had waited for someone to intervene, but now that he was here, she realized that even miracles required courage. Red's gaze never wavered from the auctioneer, who now looked both angry and uncertain. His voice trembled slightly as he tried to regain control of the situation. "This auction is legal," he said, trying to sound confident. "She owes debts. Bay. When I tried to leave, they didn't take it well." Her voice shook slightly, but she kept going. "I didn't wait for things to get worse," she said. "I ran. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I had to get away." Mark felt a tight feeling in his chest. "So you think they might be looking for you?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Not because they care, but because they don't like losing control." That made sense to him. He had seen enough of the world to know how some people acted when they felt challenged. "Did you contact anyone?" he asked. "Friends? Family?" She shook her head. "I didn't want to put anyone else in danger." Mark nodded slowly. He respected that, even if it made things harder. After breakfast, Mark decided to check the land. If someone really had been near the fence, he wanted to know. He told Anna to rest while he walked around. "Lock the door," he said. "Don't open it for anyone." "I will," she promised. Mark stepped outside, his eyes scanning everything. He walked slowly along the fence line, looking for signs, footprints, broken grass, anything that didn't belong. Near the spot where he thought he saw movement, he noticed something. The grass was pressed down in a way that didn't look natural. It wasn't clear proof, but it was enough to make his stomach turn. Someone had been there. Mark felt a wave of anger and worry. His quiet ranch was no longer just his. Someone else had stepped onto his land without permission. That crossed a line for him. When he returned to the house, his face was serious. "What did you see?" Anna asked. "Nothing clear," he said, "but enough to make me believe your fear isn't just in your head." She closed her eyes for a moment. "I was afraid of that." Mark leaned against the counter. His mind started working through options. Call someone. Move her somewhere else. Ignore it and hope it went away. None of the choices felt easy.
He had grown used to her presence over the past weeks, but tonight had been restless. The fire had burned low, and he had kept a watchful eye on her as she shifted in her sleep, murmuring faintly. Something about the way she moved and the alertness in her eyes, even when asleep, made it clear that her spirit was unbroken. He turned to reach for his tools, planning to check the supplies and prepare for the day's tasks, when a sudden movement startled him. She was no longer on the bed. She stood there, fully awake, her dark eyes fixed on him with a sharp intensity he had not seen before. For a moment he froze, unsure whether she had intended to scare him or if it was a simple consequence of her waking earlier than usual. Her posture was firm and controlled, her gaze unwavering, and it conveyed something he could not ignore. She was demanding attention. She pointed toward him, her gestures strong and deliberate, then repeated a word he could not understand. It was spoken with a tone of authority, not fear or hesitation. He recognized immediately that she was asserting herself. The realization hit him. She was no longer simply the wounded woman he had rescued. She was someone who had her own mind, her own will, and her own expectations. He nodded slowly, trying to convey respect and patience, though his heart raced at the sudden intensity of the encounter. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. He tried to speak, using simple words and gestures, indicating that he meant no harm and that she could feel safe. She did not lower her gaze. Instead, she shifted closer, leaning slightly forward, her hands moving in sharp, purposeful gestures. He realized she was demanding explanations, questions about who he was, why he had brought her into this isolated cabin, and what she could expect from him. He took a deep breath, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. The young woman's survival was proof that even in the harshest conditions, courage, skill, and compassion could change lives. The night had fallen over the small Apache settlement, casting long shadows across the rocky ground. Elias Monroe sat beside the young woman, now awake but weak, her leg carefully propped on a pile of blankets. He could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of pain, of the unknown, and perhaps of the stranger who had suddenly entered her life. He spoke softly. "I'm here to help. I won't let anything happen to you." His words were calm, steady, meant to reassure both her and the watching villagers. The injury was worse than he had initially thought. While the leg had been roughly set during the first emergency care, the bone had not aligned properly. Swelling had increased overnight, and there were signs of early infection. If he did not act now, he could lose the leg, or worse, her life. He took a deep breath, centering himself. The desert had taught him patience, improvisation, and focus, but this would be the most challenging surgery he had performed in years. Elias prepared his makeshift surgical area. A lantern flickered, casting dancing shadows on the dirt ground. He arranged his tools carefully. A small scalpel, forceps, clean cloths, sterilized water, and herbal antiseptics. Each tool had a purpose, and he knew that mistakes were not an option. He glanced at the villagers who watched silently, their faces a mix of hope and fear. Some of them had never seen a surgery performed outside a hospital, and the sight of a man working by lantern light in the middle of the desert was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He knelt beside the woman, her eyes filled with trust and anxiety. Elias whispered, "I need you to stay as still as you can. It will hurt, but you are strong. We will get through this together." She had faced storms, wild animals, and harsh weather. She could face this too. She would not run. She would not hide. She would stand and speak the truth, no matter the cost. The council finally leaned back, signaling a pause to consider their next questions. Mara's stomach twisted with anticipation. She had spoken her truth, shared her actions, and demonstrated her loyalty. Yet she knew the moment of judgment had not yet arrived. She could feel the eyes of the tribe upon her, weighing every word, every gesture. The fear was still there, but beneath it burned a fierce determination. She would not falter, she would not lie, and she would meet whatever challenge awaited her with courage. As the morning stretched on, Mara reflected on the precariousness of her situation. Rumors could rise quickly, suspicion could take root, and judgment could fall suddenly. But she also understood the strength she carried, the strength of her life, her work, her love for Tobin, and her respect for the tribe. These were her weapons, her shields, and her proof, and with them she would face the council, whatever the outcome. The chief raised his hand, signaling that questioning would continue. Mara squared her shoulders and met the eyes of the elders. She knew the road ahead was uncertain, but she also knew that fear would not guide her, only courage and truth. And so, standing in the council grounds, Mara prepared to face the accusations fully, ready to defend not only her life but the love, labor, and loyalty that had defined it. The council's whispers had grown louder, though still under their breaths, like the soft rustle of leaves before a storm. Mara could feel the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, every gaze heavy with judgment. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart thumped as if it were trying to escape her chest.
Looking out across the fields, he noticed the gentle sway of the crops in the breeze, the calm movement of the animals in their pens, and the subtle signs of life all around. It struck him how interconnected everything on the ranch was. The animals relied on the crops relied on careful irrigation, and the land relied on human care and understanding. Every action mattered, and he felt proud to play a part in this delicate balance. Suddenly, Alex noticed a small problem. A young calf had gotten slightly loose from its pen, nudging the gate open as it explored the surroundings. Without panic, Alex approached slowly, speaking in soft tones to calm the calf. Using the gentle techniques he had learned, he guided the animal back safely to its pen. The small victory filled him with pride. Not long ago, handling a calf would have been intimidating, but now he felt confident, patient, and in control. Each challenge he had faced on the ranch had prepared him for moments like this, and he realized that growth came from experience and persistence. After securing the calf, Alex returned to the fields to finish checking the crops. He discovered a few weeds beginning to sprout between the young plants. Remembering Mr. Robin Thompson's advice, he carefully removed each weed, taking care not to disturb the young seedlings. He realized that attention to detail and patience could prevent small problems from growing into big ones. It was a lesson that applied not just to the ranch, but to life itself. Careful attention, consistent effort, and thoughtful action could create meaningful results over time. By early afternoon, Alex had completed all the tasks. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he looked across the ranch. The animals were healthy, the crops were growing well, and the equipment was in perfect order. He had managed a full morning on his own, applying everything he had learned. By the time night fell over Pine Creek, the fields were quiet, the sprinklers had been turned off, and the town was settling into its usual calm. The argument had not been fully resolved, but it had started a conversation that would continue for days, weeks, and perhaps even months. Weeks. Both Tom and Molly knew that life in a small town meant that conflicts were inevitable, but so were opportunities for understanding, compromise, and growth. The second part of this story is about tension transforming into dialogue, conflict shifting into understanding, and the small human moments that make life in a rural town both challenging and rewarding. Tom and Molly had faced the storm of emotions, pride, and stubbornness head-on. What lay ahead would test them further, but for now, they had taken the first steps toward resolution, and the town of Pine Creek would remember the day that a simple irrigation pipe nearly caused a big uproar, but also created a chance for connection and compromise. Word of the confrontation between Tom Harris and Molly Sanders spread through Pine Creek like wildfire. By the next morning, nearly everyone in the town knew about the incident at the southern edge of the Harris Ranch. Small towns had a way of turning even minor disputes into stories that seemed larger than life. In Pine Creek, where most people relied on word of mouth rather than social media, it wasn't long before neighbors discussed the event over coffee, at the local store, and while tending to their own farms. People had opinions, as they always did. Some admired Tom for standing firm on his property. They remembered how he had worked tirelessly for decades to maintain the ranch, how he had raised cattle through harsh winters and hot summers, and how he had kept the land running smoothly while others had abandoned their farms. To them, Molly's request seemed bold, almost audacious. especially for someone so new to the area. The townspeople began to murmur more openly, some nodding in agreement. A few stepped closer to Martha and Samuel, placing themselves subtly in solidarity. The air seemed charged with possibility, as if the town itself was beginning to reconsider what it had accepted as normal. The auctioneer tried to argue, his voice rising in frustration. "I must settle the debts. This is legal." "It is my right." But Red was unmoved. He stepped closer to the auction block, his shadow falling over the platform. "Rights do not include cruelty," he said, "and debts cannot justify harming a mother and child. End this now, or you will answer to more than the law." There was a quiet intensity in his voice that made the auctioneer falter. He looked around at the growing crowd, noticing the questioning glances, the whispers of dissent, and the small group beginning to stand beside Martha. For the first time, he realized that he could not rely solely on fear and authority to control the situation. Martha watched in awe as Red continued. He did not yell, he did not threaten with violence, but his presence alone seemed to challenge the entire notion of the auction. The crowd began to see the widow and her child not as property, but as human beings, deserving of protection and respect. Some townspeople shifted closer to show their support, while others simply watched in silence, their expressions softening. But Martha could feel the weight of despair lifting slightly from her shoulders. For the first time, she dared to believe that they might be safe. Red turned to Martha and spoke softly, almost gently, so that Samuel could hear him as well. "You're safe now. No one will touch you or your son." Martha felt a lump in her throat. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of reassurance she had not felt in weeks. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Thank you." Red nodded, but did not smile. How they had spoken gently and then taken advantage of her weakness. Her heart warned her to be careful. But something inside her also wanted to believe him. The way he said the word "saved" was not loud or proud. It was quiet. It felt heavy with meaning, as if he understood how serious this moment was. As if he knew this was not just about money or winning. It was about her life. She swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight. Her eyes burned slightly, but she forced herself not to cry. Crying in front of people had never helped her before. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice low and unsure. The cowboy did not answer right away. He looked at her for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. Then he spoke simply. "Because no one deserves to be treated like that," he said. "Not you. Not anyone." The words were simple, but they hit her deeply. No one deserves to be treated like that. No one had ever said that to her before, not in a way that felt real. She felt something shift inside her chest, a small crack in the wall she had built around her heart. A tiny opening where hope tried to enter. She still did not fully trust him. Years of pain could not disappear in one moment. But she felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt seen. Not as a body, not as a problem, but as a person. The cowboy stepped slightly to the side, giving her space, showing with his body that he was not there to control her. His actions matched his words. That mattered more than anything he could say. People around them continued to move on with their lives. The town returned to its usual noise. But for these two, time felt different. It felt like a line had been crossed, like something old had ended and something new, unknown, had begun. The woman stood there, unsure of what her future would look like. She did not know where she would go or what would happen next. Others, however, quietly supported Molly. They knew how difficult it was to start a farm from scratch, how challenging it could be to grow crops without enough water, and how even small obstacles could determine success or failure. To them, Molly's persistence was admirable. She wasn't trying to take over someone else's land. She was simply trying to survive and build her future. Many of these supporters were fellow farmers who had faced similar challenges and understood the courage it took to ask for help. Meanwhile, the argument itself took on a life of its own. By the time the afternoon rolled around, children were imitating what they had seen, joking about the big fight at the Harris Ranch. Even the dogs seemed to sense the excitement, barking and running along fences as if they too were invested in the drama. The entire town seemed to lean in, waiting for the next development. Tom, on the other hand, felt a mix of frustration and embarrassment. He had never liked being the center of attention, and now his name and actions were being discussed at every corner of Pine Creek. It wasn't just about the property anymore. It was about pride, reputation, and the idea of respect in a town where history and hard work mattered deeply. He knew that whatever he did next would be noticed, remembered, and judged. Despite the gossip and attention, life on the ranch had to continue. Tom woke up early, as he always did, and went about his morning chores with quiet determination. He checked the cattle, repaired broken fencing, and tended to the fields, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about Molly's map, her request, and the conversation from the day before. Part of him still bristled at the idea of compromise, but another part, deeper, quieter, recognized the fairness in her proposal. Molly, too, faced the scrutiny of the town. His focus remained on the auctioneer, on the tension in the square, on ensuring that justice would be upheld. The auctioneer tried once more to assert his authority, but the crowd was no longer entirely on his side. Murmurs grew into voices, and voices grew into questions. Is this right? Can we let this happen? They are innocent? The crowd's shift in energy surprised him. He looked at Red, realizing that this lone cowboy had managed to change the dynamics of the entire town in minutes. His authority was no longer unquestioned, and the people who had once stood quietly by were beginning to speak. Red's gaze swept the crowd, meeting the eyes of those who had been silent or indifferent. He did not shout, but his presence commanded attention. "Stand for what is right," he said simply. "Protect those who cannot protect themselves." The words carried a power that resonated through the square. Some townspeople stepped forward, placing themselves subtly beside Martha, their small gestures of solidarity a silent declaration that cruelty would not go unchallenged. Martha felt hope growing stronger inside her, like a small flame refusing to be extinguished. The auctioneer finally lowered his head, realizing he could not win against a town beginning to question his actions. He muttered under his breath, "Very well, end it." The words were almost inaudible, but they carried the relief Martha had been waiting for. The nightmare that had seemed inevitable, the auction, the fear of losing her child, was finally ending. Martha felt her knees weaken, and she clutched Samuel tighter, tears streaming down her face. Relief, gratitude, and exhaustion washed over her all at once. Red stepped closer and placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said again quietly. "No one will hurt you." "Let's get you out of here." Martha nodded, her voice trembling. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." But for the first time in a long time, her future did not feel completely dark. The cowboy stood beside her, not in front of her, not behind her. Beside her, equal, quiet, steady. And in that simple position, she felt something powerful. She felt that maybe, just maybe, her life was not over. Maybe this moment was not the end of her story. Maybe it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where mercy was not just a word, but a real action that could change a broken path into a hopeful one. After the crowd slowly disappeared, the noise of the town faded into the background. The woman and the cowboy stood for a moment in an awkward silence. The air felt different now. The pressure of many eyes was gone, but the weight of what had just happened was still heavy in both of their hearts. The cowboy was the first to move. He did not rush her. He walked a few steps and then stopped, giving her time to follow if she wanted. He did not pull her, did not order her. He simply waited. This small action told her something important. He was serious about what he had said. He was not trying to control her. She hesitated. Her feet felt slow, as if they were unsure where to go. For so long, other people had decided for her. Now, suddenly, she was being given a choice. That felt strange. It felt scary, but it also felt respectful. Slowly, she followed him. They walked away from the center of town. The streets became quieter, the buildings became fewer. The air felt a little cleaner. With each step, her breathing became easier. The heavy feeling in her chest did not disappear, but it softened slightly. The cowboy led her to a small, simple place near the edge of town. It was not fancy. The walls were plain. The door was old, but it was clean and quiet. It felt safe. Safety was something she had not felt in a long time. He opened the door and stepped aside, letting her go in first. "Mark," a voice called from outside. "We're looking for someone. We were told she might be here." Hearing his own name shocked him. "How did they know?" Anna covered her mouth to keep from making a sound. Tears filled her eyes. Mark stepped closer to the door, but did not open it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said through the door. The voice outside stayed calm. Too calm. "We don't want trouble," the person said. "Just a quick look, then we'll be on our way." Mark's heart pounded. This was the moment everything changed. His quiet life, his safety, everything was at risk. He glanced back at Anna. She shook her head slightly, fear written all over her face. That's when it hit him. This was bigger than he thought. The people outside weren't just looking around. They were hunting. And by letting Anna into his home, Mark had put himself directly in the middle of it. His mind filled with thoughts of all the wrong ways this could go. Fear mixed with anger. He had lived alone to avoid exactly this kind of situation. The knock came again, harder this time. "Open the door," the voice said. "We can do this the easy way." Mark felt a rush of emotion. Fear, rage, protectiveness. He had never planned to be a hero. He just wanted a quiet life. But now, someone was trying to bring danger into his home. He raised the knife slightly, ready for anything. Then something happened that made him stumble back in shock. From outside, he heard another voice, a voice that sounded unsure. "She's hurt," the second voice said. "We shouldn't be doing this." There was an argument outside. Low voices, tense words. Mark realized something important in that moment. Not everyone out there agreed with what was happening. The situation was more complicated than he thought. There were cracks in the people chasing Anna. Doubt, conflict. Mark stepped back from the door, his mind racing. This wasn't just a simple threat.
After he finished, she finally relaxed slightly, though the tension in her posture did not fully disappear. She repeated a word he did not understand, but accompanied it with a gesture toward the wound on her arm. He nodded again, beginning to clean and dress it once more, using slow, deliberate movements to show care and avoid startling her.
As he worked, he spoke softly, explaining each step, pointing to the supplies, demonstrating that every action had a purpose.
She watched every movement, occasionally reaching out to adjust a bandage herself, a subtle acknowledgement of growing trust. Over the next hours, their interaction became a careful dance of observation, gestures, and cautious words. She was no longer a passive patient, but an active participant in her own recovery. He began to understand that this woman who had arrived at his cabin wounded and wary was now asserting herself in a way that demanded respect and attention. It was a turning point in their relationship. He realized he could no longer act as a solitary healer making decisions alone. She was part of the process now, shaping the dynamic, testing boundaries, and insisting on her own agency. The forest outside remained quiet, though the wind whispered through the trees and the distant calls of birds reminded him of the wildness beyond the cabin walls. Every sound seemed amplified in the early morning light, and both of them were alert to potential dangers. Wolves, predators, or even human threats could appear at any moment. Yet within the cabin, a fragile understanding had emerged. Neither could act recklessly, and survival required cooperation and attention to the other's needs and strengths. By midday, the surgeon had prepared a small meal, which she accepted cautiously. She ate slowly, pausing often to observe him, her gaze sharp and attentive. It was clear that even as her body healed, her mind remained vigilant.